So we're back today. We should be finishing up this book, and hopefully we'll have enough time um, to do the weekly reading. Uh, this section is The Forest, parentheses of magic. Uh, for his drawing, study of foliage, which is that. Edward Hopper selected a vantage point on a street that perspectively tapers toward the background. From this point, the viewer gaze is drawn almost irresistibly to the picture's true subject, the forest. Important characteristics of Hopper's depictions of the forest are evident in this study. Densely staggered, seemingly moving treetops frame the entrance to a mysterious world. Sorry, the pole's a bit in the way, so. Hopper used the medium of drawing to record his perception of the environment. From 1930 on, he no longer painted his oil pictures outdoors in nature, but rather as a synthesis of his impressions in the studio. Numerous studies served as the basis for iconic painting Gas. Here in the background behind the filling station, a murky forest borders the street and swallows it up, suggesting a road to an uncertain future. Massive trees at Eastham, one of Hopper's last watercolors, is like many of his late works shaped by a stark reduction of pictorial elements. He began working on it in the backseat of his car and completed it in the studio. It shows an expansive landscape blanketed by yellowish grass at an intersection from which one of the roads leads towards a dense forest. Hopper plays with techniques here in order to make the tree tops and the soft carpet-like grass, which is cut by the edges of the road, tangible for the viewer in different ways. The watercolor Mofield Plantation going back to it because I really liked this one. On the other hand, is characterized by the relationship between forest and architecture. Magnificent two-story 19th century home is at the center of the scene. The porticos on the front of the house, as well as large parts of the park-like garden, stand in the sunshine. To the sides and behind the house rises impenetrable forest that conveys menacing impression. The edges of the forest extend into the garden and cast shadows onto the house. Civilization and nature are juxtaposed here in starkly contrasting terms. In the painting Stairway, Hopper shows the forest from an elevated perspective on the staircase in the corridor of the house. The diagonal lines formed by the stairs and the wood handrail guide the viewer's gaze through the open front door toward the forest, which, seen backlit, appears as a dark mass and casts long shadows in the direction of the door. It is an image in which Hopper links general notions about the mysterious and impenetrable forest with his personal memories, to the extent that the entrance area recalls the hallway of his parents' home in Nyack. And this is Cape Cod Morning, 1950, oil on canvas. That's, I believe, our 12th blank page in this book. Second Story Sunlight, 1960, oil on canvas. Study of a country road with trees and telephone poles. Fabricated chalk on paper. Study of foliage. Fabricated chalk on paper. Study of a hillside landscape with trees, 1936 through 1938, fabricated chalk on paper. White River, Vermont, 1937 through 1938. Trees on a Hill, 1938, watercolor on paper. Vermont, Shallows and White River, 1938, fabricated chalk on paper. Massive Trees at Eastham, 1962, watercolor and graphite pencil on paper. Road and Trees, 1962, oil on canvas. Biography, compiled by Katharina Ruppel, 1882 through 98. Edward Hopper is born on July 22nd, 1882, in Nyack, New York, a small town along the Hudson River shaped by the boat-building industry. The younger of two children, he is raised in an educated middle-class family that belongs to the local Baptist church. Edward's interest in English, French, Russian, and German literature is awakened by his father, Garrett Henry Hopper. His mother, Elizabeth Griffith Smith Hopper, encourages Edward and his sister, Mary and Louise, to pursue their artistic inclinations. Hopper's considerable talent is already evident at 5, and he develops his abilities further while at school. One of his first oil paintings, the depiction of a sailing vessel from around 1898, reflects the artist's lifelong fascination with the sea and his initial plan to become a naval architect. 1899 through 1905, artistic training. Hopper begins his training after graduating from Nyack High School. Since his family considers the career path of a painter precarious, he enrolls at the Correspondence School of Illustrating in New York City in 1899 to study commercial art. A year later, he transfers to the New York School of Art, where he initially studies illustration with Frank Vincent Dumond and Arthur I. Keller. As of 1901, Hopper attends painting classes taught by William Merritt Chase, Robert Henri, and Kenneth Hayes Miller. Their explicit encouragement that Hopper study his immediate environment and articulate his impressions in realistic paintings is formative for the development of Hopper's characteristic artistic vocabulary. His classmates, some of whom become lifelong friends, include George Bellows, Patrick Henry Bruce, Rockwell Kent, Walter Puck, Guy Penn Du Bois, and Walter Tittle. Hopper is a popular and talented student. In 1903, he is awarded a scholarship in life drawing and receives the school's painting prize. In 1904, the school tasked him with teaching Saturday classes in life drawing, as well as painting, sketching, and composition. (1905 through 25). Hopper earns his living for many years as a freelance illustrator and graphic artist for such New York advertising agencies as C.C. Phillips and Company and Sherman and Bryan. To some extent, he has to acquire new customers and commissions, and works for specialized journals and magazines. He takes little delight in these jobs because the subjects are determined by others, and he would prefer to concentrate on his own artistic work. He does, however, take up motifs in his commercial illustrations that can be found in his autonomous drawings, etchings, watercolors, and oil paintings, boats, trains, and movie theater auditoriums. (1906 to 1910). Travels to Paris and moving to New York City. In 1906, Hopper leaves for Europe, where he would live and work for the next 10 months. He spends a great deal of time in Paris and is fascinated by the city and its inhabitants. With the exception of his former classmate Patrick Henry Bruce, who is in Paris at the same time, Hopper does not seek out contact with other artists or avant-garde intellectual circles. He visits numerous exhibitions and sees works of artists such as Gustave Courbet, Paul Cézanne, Albert Marquet, Alfred Sisley, Auguste Renoir, and Camille Pissarro. He spends most of his time painting and drawing Parisian street scenes along the Seine in a style influenced by the luminous palette and free brushstrokes typical of the Impressionists. Hopper visits London, Amsterdam, Berlin, and Brussels before returning home to New York by way of Paris in August 1907. 1908, Hopper leaves Nyack and settles for good in New York. The now 26-year-old artist takes part in his first group show, exhibition of paintings and drawings by contemporary American artists, which was organized by former Henri students. He shows 3 of the paintings he made in 1907 during his stay in Paris. None of them are sold or reviewed in the press. Hopper's earnings from his work as a commercial artist enable him to take 2 further trips to Europe. 1909, from March to July, Hopper stays in Paris, and the drawings and paintings he makes there, including Valley of the Seine. Hopper already turns attention to the theme of landscape and discovers light and shade as powerful means of expression. Moreover, as can be seen in Le Bistrot or The Wine Shop, he employs a considerably more structured and composed formal language than in the freely sketched paintings from 1907. 1910. Edward Hopper runs a studio at 53rd East 59th Street. He spends most of his time by himself. He reads a great deal and frequently goes to the movies. In April, he submits his oil painting Le Louvre et la Seine to the exhibition of independent artists organized by John Sloan and Robert Henri. The painting remains unsold. His third and final European venture, from May to early July, takes him to Paris and then Spain. 1912 to 1914, New Motifs, sojourns in Maine and Massachusetts. Hopper spends the summer with his former classmate Leon Moreau in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Over the course of the following years, he travels regularly to Massachusetts and Maine. 1913. After unsuccessfully participating in several exhibitions, Hopper shows his oil painting Sailing at the International Exhibition of Modern Art in New York, also known as the Armory Show. The painting finds a buyer. It is the last oil painting he will sell in the next 10 years. Hopper's father dies in Nyack in the fall. In December, Hopper moves into rooms at 3 Washington Square in New York City. He lives and works there for the rest of his life. Although the building is located in a neighborhood frequented by artists, writers, and intellectuals, Hopper leads a withdrawn life. He begins recording information about his paintings, his sales, and other sources of income in ledger books, consistently reproducing his paintings in them as small-scale drawings. 1914. Hopper spends the summer in Ogunquit, Maine. He produces numerous views of the rocky cliffs that reveal his great interest in the effect of color and the depiction of light and shade. One of the pictures he paints there, Rodin, Maine, is shown at the Montross Gallery in New York City and exhibited for the first time in a commercial gallery. Hopper earns his living this year by, among other things, designing movie posters for the U.S. Printing and Lithograph Company. 1915 to 1923. Hopper learns how to create etchings. In the following years, he produces more than 50 works in the medium, gradually making a reputation for himself as an artist. In February, he exhibits his oil paintings, New York Corner and Soir Bleu, at the MacDowell Club of New York. Critics review his works for the first time. New York Corner is positively recorded, but the poor reviews for Soir Bleu prompt him to give up French subject matter in his painting, dealing with them solely in his prints. Hopper, like Henri and Bellows, spends the summer in Ogunquit from 1916 to 1919. However, he summers on Mohegan Island, where he depicts not only the rocky coast but also street views. 1916, Hopper purchases his own printing press. 1918, he is awarded first prize from the United States Shipping Board Emergency Fleet Corporation for his poster, Smash the Hun, which thematically responds to the zeitgeist and attracts a great deal of attention. Guy Penn Du Bois, a friend of Hopper's from art school, writes a newspaper article in which he reviews the artist's etchings on view at the MacDowell Club. From now on, Penn Du Bois regularly reviews Hopper's works, decisively contributing to his increasing reputation. At Penn Du Bois' intervention, Hopper becomes a member of the Whitney Studio Club in New York, founded by Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney and Juliana Force, one of the country's liveliest cultural centers at the time. The contemporary art acquired by Whitney and Force will make up the core of the Whitney Museum of American Art when it opens in 1931. 1920. The first solo exhibition of the now 37-year-old Hopper takes place at the Whitney Studio. The show features prints, watercolors, and 16 oil paintings, most of which were made in Paris. The exhibition attracts little attention in the press, and none of his works from the show sell. Hopper's etchings concentrate on the depiction of typical American architecture, which he later also renders in many of his paintings. Hopper's works are represented at numerous exhibitions in 1921 and 1922, including shows in New York and Washington, D.C. In 1922, Hopper becomes friends with John Dos Passos, a major figure in American literature, when the writer and his wife Katie move into the same townhouse on Washington Square North. 1923. Although he often receives prizes for his prints, Hopper makes, with the exception of two in 1928, a final group of etchings. He sees himself as a painter and wishes to be recognized as such. During his summer vacation that year in Gloucester, Hopper again encounters Josephine Versatile Nivison. They had already met at art school. They undertake painting excursions together, during which Hopper makes his first landscape watercolors. One of them sells for $100 at an exhibition later that year at the Brooklyn Museum. In 1924 to 1934. Josephine and Edward wed in July. Penne Dubois is Hopper's best man. The Frank K.M. Wren Galleries present the now 42-year-old artist's first solo exhibition in a commercial gallery. 16 watercolors are sold. Hopper remains associated with this gallery for the rest of his life. 1925. His increasing artistic success permits him to give up his day job as a commercial illustrator. The Metropolitan Museum of Art acquires 15 of Hopper's etchings, and for the first time he sells an oil painting to a museum, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia. From April to September, the Hoppers undertake their first cross-country railroad trip. He produces more than 10 watercolors during their stays in Colorado and Santa Fe. That same year, Hopper paints the Bootleggers and House by the Railroad. The latter is shown and also sold at his 1926 exhibition at the Anderson Galleries in New York. In his review, the young art critic Lloyd Goodrich expresses enthusiastic praise for the striking picture of a large Victorian building rising up behind railroad tracks. He subsequently becomes one of the most ardent supporters of Hopper's art. Hopper spends the summer and fall working in Rockland, Maine, and in Gloucester. 1927. The Hoppers buy their first automobile, with which they can reach more remote sites from their summer vacation home at Cape Elizabeth, Maine. One of Hopper's favorite motifs, the lighthouse, appears in paintings. He makes the summer Lighthouse Hill and Captain Upton's house. Josephine and Edward Hopper also visit Portland, Ogunquit, and Charlestown, New Hampshire. Hopper paints the city as well, which is successfully sold at the Frank K. M. Wren Galleries. Hopper becomes better known with the publication of the articles about him in the Arts, the painting of Edward Hopper and Edward Hopper. In 1928, during his summer vacation, Hopper produces 13 watercolors and 3 oil paintings, including freight cars. Gloucester Vanity Fair publishes an article on Hopper early in the year. The Hoppers traveled to Charleston, South Carolina in April, later returning to New York by way of Charlottesville and Richmond, Virginia, as well as Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. They spend the summer at Cape Elizabeth, where Hopper paints railroad sunset. 1930. Hopper exhibits for the first time in the American Pavilion at 17th Venice Biennale. The Hoppers spend their first summer vacation in Truro on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, as they would over the following 3 summers. The couple rents a cottage on A. Burleigh Cobb's farm. Hopper's reputation as an artist is reinforced through museum acquisitions and reviews of his art in the press. 1931, Guy Pene Dubois, The American Paintings of Edward Hopper in Creative Art. 1932, Frank Crowninshield, A Series of American Artists, No. 3, Edward Hopper in Vanity Fair. 1933, the Hoppers make a long trip to Charlestown, New Hampshire, Quebec, Portland, and the Two Lights Lighthouse at Cape Elizabeth, as well as to Gloucester, Magnolia, and Boston, Massachusetts, before returning to Truro in October, where they purchased land. In November, the Museum of Modern Art in New York opens the first retrospective exhibition dedicated to the work of the now 51-year-old artist, featuring 25 oil paintings and 37 watercolors. It is also shown a year later at the Arts Club of Chicago. Alfred H. Barr Jr. is responsible for the exhibition and accompanying catalog, for which he writes the introduction. Hopper's paintings Early Sunday Morning and Lombard's House, as well as the 2 etchings, are exhibited in the American Pavilion at the 19th Venice Biennale. 1934, the Hoppers build a studio house on the property they purchased in Truro. They move into it in July and later spend almost every summer and fall there. (1935 to 1949). The established painter and traveler. While the sale of his art remains within bounds over the coming years, Hopper shows his works at several exhibitions, and they are awarded numerous prizes. Edward Hop's mother, Elizabeth, dies in 1935. That same year, he paints House at Dusk and Shakespeare at Dusk. 1937, a solo exhibition encompassing 32 oil paintings, 53 watercolors, and 11 etchings opens at the Carnegie Institute in Pittsburgh. The Hoppers spend their summer in Truro and Vermont. 1938, the watercolor Joe painting is featured in the 133rd annual exhibition at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Hopper paints Compartment C car. 1939. In March, the Art Institute of Chicago presents a retrospective of the artist's watercolors, featuring 26 works in conjunction with the 18th International Exhibition. Hopper actively protests the Federal Art Project, which is part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, because he believes it promotes artistic mediocrity. 1940. In order to register to vote against Roosevelt, Hopper interrupts his stay at Truro and returns to New York City. Hopper paints Gas, one of his most famous paintings. It is acquired by the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 1942. In 1941, from May to July, the Hoppers make an extensive road trip along the West Coast to California and Oregon, along with Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado. The couple visits museums and collectors during their travels. Arnold Newman takes his photographs of Edward Hopper in November. In 1942, Hopper paints Nighthawks, an icon of modern American painting. 1943, wartime gas rationing prevents the Hoppers from driving to Truro. Instead, they travel from June to September by railroad to Mexico City, Saltillo, and Monterey. 1945. Hopper is elected to the National Institute of Arts and Letters. He paints rooms for tourists and two Puritans. 1946. In May, Hopper makes a second trip to Mexico with his wife. Upon their return, they are informed that New York University has purchased the building in which they live, and their rental contract is thus to be canceled. A long legal dispute ensues, which the Hoppers ultimately win. 1947. Josephine Hopper writes in her diary that her husband is depressed and lacks motivation. He reads much the poems of Robert Frost and goes to the movies. 1948. In February, Hopper undergoes his first prostate operation. He has further extended hospital stays. Compartment C card 293 is exhibited at the 24th Venice Biennale. Time prints a cover story on Hopper. Penguin Books publishes Lloyd Goodrich's monograph on Hopper. In 1949, Berenice Abbott photographs the artist at his studio. 1950 to 1967, the late years. Numerous honors are bestowed upon Hopper during the final years of his life. He receives 3 honorary doctorates from the Art Institute of Chicago in 1950, from Rutgers University in 1953, and from the Philadelphia College of Art in 1965. He is awarded the Gold Medal of the National Institute of Arts and Letters, 1955, made a member of the Academy of Arts and Letters, 1956, and receives the Art in America Award, 1960, as well as the Edward McDowell Medal for Outstanding Contributions to Art, 1966. In 1950, a retrospective exhibition of Hopper's work organized by Lloyd Goodrich is shown at the Whitney Museum of American Art, and it features 73 oil paintings, 60 watercolors, and 17 drawings from the time between 1907 and 1949. The exhibition tours to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and the Detroit Institute of Arts. In September, the Hoppers visit Orleans on Cape Cod, where he paints Portrait of Orleans and Cape Cod Morning. Charlotte Birchfield publishes the article Hopper, Career of Silent Poetry in Art News. 1951, in May, Josephine and Edward travel to Mexico by way of Chattanooga, Tennessee, with a stopover in Santa Fe on their way home. 1952, Hopper joins 40 other artists who form the Reality Group, which protests against the preferential treatment given to abstract art by institutions like the Museum of Modern Art. 15 oil paintings and 5 watercolors by Hopper are shown, along with works by Alexander Calder, Stuart Davis, and Yasuo Kuniyoshi, in the American Pavilion at the 26th Venice Biennale. In December, the Hoppers travel to Mexico by way of El Paso, Texas, and spend a month near Mitla, Oaxaca, where they visit Puebla and Laredo. 1955, the Hoppers return to Mexico from March to May. 1956, Early Sunday Morning is exhibited in the American Pavilion at the 28th Venice Biennale. The cover story of Times 1956 Christmas Eve issue, titled The Silent Witness, is devoted to Edward Hopper. 1960, Arnold Newman photographs Hopper in front of his house in Truro. 1963, the critic Brian O'Doherty and the photographer Hans Namath visit Truro and accompany Hopper at work. This sojourn and later conversations between Hopper and the critic form the basis for O'Doherty's article, Portrait, Edward Hopper, published in December 1964 in Art in America. 1964, in September, the Whitney Museum of American Art presents its Edward Hopper exhibition featuring 74 oil paintings, 62 watercolors, 27 etchings, and 21 drawings. 1965, Hopper's sister Marion dies in Nyack. In November, he paints the last of his 366 oil pictures, Two Comedians. In 1967, on May 15th, after a protracted hospital stay, Edward Hopper dies in his studio at the age of 84. His wife Josephine dies a year later, on March 6th. Hopper's entire artistic estate, comprising over 3,000 works, is bequeathed to the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. So that will end this for us. The only remaining portion is index of the catalog. Have about 7 minutes left, so we will go ahead and do the weekly reading. If there's any questions you have, or I will come up with my own. Alright, I'll go ahead. Will I enjoy, or rather, I don't know, I'm still undecided if I even want to see it, so is the Beetlejuice sequel something that I'm going to feel is worthwhile? Well, there's no questions. I don't really have anything else that's really on my mind. Well, At least not that I haven't asked in previous weeks, and don't really want to revisit anything at the moment. So I guess we'll cut that short this week. Um, I know I said I wouldn't stream tonight, but how that stream went last night was really frustrating for me. So I'd like to see if I could figure out what went wrong. So I might actually stream tonight, and that'll be the next part of Game Wizards, which will be about, I believe, 1980. And then tomorrow we will have most likely some sort of opening stream. So that'll be it for me for today.